Hi, good morning, class. This is Dr. Spagnolo. I put together just this brief summary of the discussion forum responses for the older adults intervention lecture that we just completed at the beginning of the week. And I wanted to share some of the highlights from your posts and congratulate you on doing a really amazing job this week, responding to the original question and then to one another. It was a real pleasure to read. Many of you chose the HOPES intervention as the one that you wanted to describe for older adults. And that's really not surprising because it seems as though every time Derek and I provide this lecture, that's the one that gets kind of the top billing. So we did note that there were several of you who chose the HOPES intervention to describe. And so there were six of you actually that chose that one. We also had two students choose the cognitive remediation strategy, three that chose interpersonal psychotherapy, one that chose cognitive bibliography, and then one who chose cognitive behavioral social skills training. So we had a nice variety of interventions described in the forum. And even among those of you who all chose hopes, I think you did a really nice job of describing the intervention and the outcomes from different angles. So that was nice because there wasn't a lot of repetition in the forum. I felt like each of your responses were fresh, and you didn't repeat with what each other said. So that's great. So I'm just going to kind of start from the top of my list in summarizing the class's responses. Raquel chose hopes, and she talked about it from the perspective of its outcomes. And she specifically noted that hopes resulted in improvements in functional impairments, cognitive patterns, and self confidence related to decision making, which, as we know, one of the most critical skills required for the management of health and mental health is people's ability to make choices and decisions based on the information available to them. So, part of that involves having the self confidence to make those decisions. Solil also talked about the HOPES intervention, and she discussed the relevance of community tenure for older adults and how important and linked a person's community tenure is to their health and wellness. We also know that the research available, especially as it relates to older adults, is that people generally tend to be healthier when they're able to stay in their own homes rather than moved into congregate settings like assisted living and nursing care and care facilities. So I thought that was an important point to note is that if we can keep people healthy and independently living in their own homes, we can expect better health outcomes. Syed talked about hopes as well, and from the perspective of health and disease management being directly linked to quality of life. So that was a good point to raise. Matthew chose cognitive remediation and talked more about the differences in health outcomes when you consider people who have natural unpaid social support versus people who are socially isolated. And we know for certain that folks that have limited interactions with others report lower quality of life and poorer health outcomes. Juana also talked about cognitive remediation from the perspective of the effects of it being increased attention, increased memory, language, executive functioning, and described the approach similarly to the way that developers do as exercise for the brain. And many of us consider the various exercises we do to keep our bodies physically healthy, but may not pay as much attention to the things that keep our brains physically healthy. And as a student, you may be thinking, well, I do this all the time between readings and having to write and having to respond and having to listen and learn. But as people age, their opportunities for that intellectual wellness dimension may become smaller or diminished. So, creating strategies to exercise the brain is one of the things that cognitive remediation specifically focuses on. David talked about the benefits and values of an interpersonal psychotherapy approach for older adults, and one of the things that he noted in his post that I thought was good is this idea of interpersonal psychotherapy really getting to the heart of the specificity of the presenting problem. And for any of us that are interested in goal setting and goal acquisition, we know that identifying the presenting problem leads to steps for creating the actual plan to address and reduce the barriers that the person is experiencing. So I thought it was good to mention this idea of specificity. Cindy also chose psychotherapy and person might be having in their life, adapting to life changes as an older adult, and increased use of social skills development. All really critically important for people at any life stage, but demonstrated to be very helpful for older adults. Going back to hopes, Julianne provided us with a really nice example of a person who may have experienced a stroke and what some of the psychosocial aspects of that might have on a person's mental health. She also pointed, as someone else did, to the importance of independent living for older adults and some of the things that can be considered triggers, um, more symbolic of mental health conditions that should be addressed. So when people are experiencing some of these symptoms of mental health conditions, hopes can really help the person parse out what is a mental health condition, what are potentially symptoms of depression related to physical illness versus some other thing that may be occurring in the individual's life. Paul also talked about hopes and did a really nice job of summarizing kind of this broader 8 dimensions of wellness model and honing in on the physical wellness dimension to talk about things like eating healthy, sleep, diet and nutrition, and physical activity, all combined, having an effect on a person's mental health and physical condition. Carly was the only student who talked about cognitive bibliography. So thank you, Carly, for bringing in one of the interventions that was not necessarily as described. And she highlighted specifically the importance of self-directed approaches as well as those that incorporate existing evidence-based practices like cognitive behavioral therapy. Imani talked about hopes, and she focused her post mostly on using medications effectively, which for any of us who have parents or loved ones who are aging and maybe experiencing some cognitive decline, we're very aware of how many medications people are using, um, how complicated people can make very simple mistakes that can lead to some pretty serious physical and mental health complications. So the last two I wanted to focus in on were Emily and Carolina. So Emily did interpersonal psychotherapy, but she approached it from a much, I think, different angle that I appreciated. Emily talked about the larger effect of interpersonal psychotherapy on how people interface with the world around them, and I thought that that was really wise because we know for many older adults the older they get, the smaller their circle becomes, the smaller their exposure to the external world becomes. And that, in and of itself, that change in their environment and their experiences can have real effects on how they view themselves in relation to the larger world. So, considering what the person's experiences, environment, interactions with others are like, we can really start to help people determine, are they satisfied with what their external world looks like? And if they're not, we can help strategize ways in which the older adult can get more connected to some of the people and experiences that they once found to be part of their quality of life. And then Carolina did cognitive behavioral social support training, and made a very clear distinction in her post that there is a lack of social support among older adults that can absolutely lead to poor or compromised physical health. So I appreciated that that was just very explicitly stated in Carolina's post. So generally, really good job this week. I think that many of you did a nice job not only answering the original question, but responding to one another in substantive ways, meaning your responses didn't just say, great job, I agree, but rather you either added to the person's position or you asked a follow up question for clarification or you added an example of your own to kind of support the person's original reply. So that was great. I also want to remind you that there are specific dates that you should be getting your original posts into the forum. And there are also specific dates that you should be answering one another. So just be mindful of the due dates for those things because in order to receive full credit for your participation in the forum, you have to have timely responses. Also, in Derek's instructions for each of the forums, most times he indicates that you should be referencing where you got the source of your material. So becoming more comfortable doing that and creating the habit of referencing external resources is going to ensure that you get full credit as well. So good work. I enjoyed reading everything, and I will be posting grades in the grade book over the next day or so for this forum. And I look forward to reading assignment number 2 that you all will be submitting. So hope you have a great rest of the week and enjoy the weekend. Thanks.